All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's Drought in the Midwest webinar. My name is Molly Wolozin and I coordinate the Midwest Drought Early Warning System at NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. I am with the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences at the University of Colorado in Boulder. This webinar is part of a new series of bi-monthly drought webinars designed to provide stakeholders and other interested parties in the Midwest with timely and relevant drought information and resources. First, some housekeeping items. On this webinar, all attendees are muted. If you have questions during the webinar, please ask them at any time using the questions box in GoToWebinar. We will have time at the end to address these questions with our speakers. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. The webinar recording will be available on the NIDIS YouTube channel and also linked from the webinars page on drought.gov. We will also send an email when the webinar recording has been posted. Today's webinar will include 3 presentations. First, we'll hear about current drought conditions and impacts across the Midwest from Trent Ford, the Illinois state climatologist. Next, Crystal Pettit from the National Weather Service in Indianapolis, Indiana, will give us an overview of drought outlook information. And finally, today's DEWS partner presentation will be given by Aaron Wilson, the state climatologist of Ohio. He will highlight drought early warning efforts in Ohio and a perspective on the 2024 drought. I wanted to take a quick moment to highlight the partners that help make this webinar series possible. These partners are instrumental in the development of these webinars, and the products and services they provide are pivotal in staying updated on conditions across the region. Before we begin presentations, a brief background about NIDIS. NIDIS was created by Congress in 2006 with a mandate to help the nation prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. NIDIS does this through a series of activities, including the coordination of regional drought early warning systems, or DEWS, shown on the map here, and through support to improve drought predictions and forecasting, effective drought planning and preparedness, and assessing the impacts of drought. All of NIDIS's work is done in collaboration with a wide range of partners at all levels. In addition, NIDIS hosts the U.S. Drought Portal, available at drought.gov. The Drought Portal provides up-to-date drought conditions across a variety of scales, interactive and customizable maps, historical drought information, and much, much more. We encourage you to visit drought.gov for your drought information needs. Next, stay in touch with NIDIS and the Midwest DEWS. Please use the link in the chat box to sign up for our national or regional newsletters. To facilitate our early warning system, more precipitation observations are needed. We encourage you to join CocoRa's, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. CocoRa's is a nonprofit, community-based network of volunteers of all ages and backgrounds who work together to measure and map rain, hail, and snow and to report conditions. To become a volunteer or to learn more, visit cocoras.org. Understanding on-the-ground drought impacts is important for accurate drought monitoring and response. One way to report your drought impacts is through the Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, or CMOR system, hosted by the National Drought Mitigation Center. Another way to report is for CocoRa's observers. You have the option to submit a condition monitoring report. These are both great user-friendly systems to submit the impacts you are experiencing from too much or too little water. Becoming a regular reporter makes this information more accessible to those who assess drought in your state. Links to learn more about both are in the chat box. All right, without further ado, I will now pass it off to Trent Ford for the first presentation. And just a reminder, please add any questions you have for our speakers in the questions box as we go along, and we will get to those at the end. Trent, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. So as Molly mentioned, my name is Trent Ford. I'm the state climatologist of Illinois. I'm based at the U of I here in Champaign-Urbana. And I'm going to cover kind of our current drought conditions and any kind of impacts we've seen over the last couple months or so. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Molly. So let's start with precipitation. And basically what I'm going to do is walk through conditions as we see them in drought in different ways. Precipitation, soil moisture, we'll talk about stream flow, things like that. Start with precipitation. So we had the first map on the left is showing precipitation as a departure from normal between April 1st and May 31st. So that kind of that 2-month period that encapsulates most of a planting, especially of corn and beans, especially in the kind of central part of the Midwest. And you can see here that we had some dry conditions, not extremely so, but dry across swaths of northern Minnesota, northern Illinois, parts of Iowa, and then just over the boundary of I-70, essentially, extremely wet conditions from southwest Missouri across southern Illinois, big swaths of Kentucky and Indiana. And that really set up a tale of 2 growing seasons. And actually here in Illinois, we had a lot of corn and beans going in earlier in northern Illinois being planted than southern Illinois, just because of the delays with wetness. So kind of set up a little bit of a dichotomy there for the spring. Since then, we've been more consistently wet. So the map on the right is June 1st to yesterday, August 6th, as far as precipitation as a departure from normal. You can see big wet spots in Iowa, southern Minnesota, northern Missouri, and large parts of Illinois, Wisconsin. And then there's a few areas where we've been a bit drier. So here in East Central Illinois, right around Champaign, we've been 2 to 4 inches drier than normal over that time period. Not extremely dry, but certainly a little bit drier than normal. And then we've seen just in the last recent few weeks some pretty dry pattern set up in central Michigan from roughly Grand Haven across the Saginaw. That's an area that we're going to be focusing some of the reports about drought impacts on here later in the talk. But overall, I would say, and we'll see this with the drought monitor, especially in the numbers there, this has not been a drought growing season so far. We really haven't seen many places outside of a couple of isolated areas that have had drought concerns for most of the growing season so far. Go to the next slide, Molly. So just to give you an idea, this is the same kind of map here, precipitation departures from our average, but this is going back to the beginning of the year. So all the way from January 1st. And again, we can just kind of contrast. We have Danville, Illinois, just down the road from where I am here. They've had about 18 inches of rain from January 1st to the end of July. That's the 7th driest, actually, on record there, and the driest start to the year since 2007. And yet they still had a pretty decent summer of rainfall still. But then we can compare that not that far away in Aberdeen, Kentucky. I think that's the wettest place I could find in our region. 58 inches of rain. And Chip, if he was on, could tell us how much on average Aberdeen would get. But that's probably pretty stinking close to the the average annual precipitation that part of Kentucky gets. And so for it to get that much rain in the first 7 months of the year is quite incredible. Certainly the wettest, for 7 months on record there, and almost for the entire state of Kentucky. So again, honestly, if we were to look back on this entire year growing season, more of our region has really dealt with wet extremes than dry extremes. Go to the next slide. So, that's on the precipitation side. When we focus more on summer, I think a big story this summer is how warm it's been. On the left, the map is showing the average temperature departures from normal across the region, going back to June 1st. So this is June 1st through yesterday. And you can see for pretty much everywhere except maybe the very northwest stretch of Minnesota, where our summertime average temperatures have been between 1 and 6 degrees above average, a little bit higher in the eastern Corn Belt. And certainly that ranks this summer so far, again, in the eastern Corn Belt in the top 10 to 20 warmest, at least June and July periods on record. A little bit cooler, and like I mentioned, as you go west and north. But this is sort of lying with numbers, because one of the consistencies with this summer has not just been above average temperatures, but the incredible amount of humidity and the persistence of that humidity. When we get, generally speaking, in this part of the country, when we get a very dry summer, we have high temperatures as during the daytime, but our nights can cool down a little bit. But when we have those very high, hot and humid summers, that means that our daytime temperatures may not reach the triple digits or the high 90s as often, but our nighttime temperatures or overnight lows stay really highly elevated. So notice on the map on the right, these are rankings as far as the average temperature so far this summer by climate division. So you can see again, for parts of Ohio, Indiana, we're top 10 to top 20. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Molly. And it's going to show the same kind of map, only it's going to be rankings for nighttime temperatures. And you can see now all of a sudden those 10s and 11s turns into 1s and 2s, meaning that in these areas where you see 1s, central Indiana, western Ohio, those are areas where the June to July average nighttime low temperature is the highest on record there, going back to 1895. So again, we have had a hot and very humid summer, but the flavor of that heat has been more of the high humidity, a little bit lesser evaporative demand or evaporation, and very high overnight temperatures. Go to the next slide. The kind of thinking here is, there may be a little bit of a delay. There we go. The kind of thinking here is that when we're hot, especially in the summertime, we have higher evaporation rates. And like I mentioned, sometimes that can be the case. On the left here, this map is showing a product called EDDI, the Evaporative Drought Demand Index. And anywhere you're seeing reds to yellows here, this is where we have roughly higher evaporative demand, so a higher atmospheric thirst for water than normal for that 2-month period ending August 1st. That being said, though, when we look at the whole region, despite our temperatures throughout summer being pretty high, that high humidity has kept that evaporative demand lower, because what we need to take a lot of evaporation from the crop and from our ecosystems is not only high temperatures, but lots of room in the air to take in that moisture. And when we have high humidity, we just don't have that extra room. And so the plot on the right is the overall total amount of evapotranspiration, or what we call reference ET, between June and July for the whole Midwest region every single year going back to 1979. And you can see some ups and downs, but this year actually was below average. So despite the fact that we are, in some places a top 10 to top 20 warmest summer on record so far, we have had actually below average for a region evaporation because of that high humidity. It's important here, I have the asterisk there that heat equals higher evaporation rates. That's not really considering the humidity. And of course, you see the 2 years that stick out like big middle fingers here, flipping us off, are 1988 and 2012, right? And those are years when not only we had the high heat, but we also had very low humidity. Those were very dry years and very bad drought years. Whereas this year, yes, it's been hot, but it's also been quite humid, which has kind of tamped down those evaporation rates, which has meant that in the places where we have had a little bit of drought, it hasn't turned into a rapid kind of flash drought situation because of that heat. Go to the next slide there, Molly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more ag and ecology. I'm showing soil moisture here. Anywhere we don't directly measure soil moisture with a sensor, which is pretty much almost everywhere in the Midwest because we don't have fantastic coverage with soil moisture sensors yet, we have to use satellites and models to kind of fill in the gaps. So, and as with everything, every model is wrong, just, some are less wrong than others. So what I'm showing you here is 2 different model depictions of soil moisture. And kind of like common sense, anywhere you see reds to browns, it's drier than normal soils. Anywhere you see blues, those are wetter than normal soils. The one on the left is from NASA, their sport model, the top 15-inch soil moisture. You can see Iowa's been very wet this pretty much the entire growing season, certainly the summer. You see the drought kind of issues, the drier conditions around Lake Michigan, especially through central and western Michigan, that kind of bleed into northeast Illinois, northern Indiana. And then the map on the right is a different product called Crop Chasma put up by the USDA, and that's the top 40 inches of soil, so a little bit deeper. But you see the same kind of patterns here. Quite a bit wetter than average across southern Minnesota and Iowa, a little bit drier than average, the Chicagoland area, southwest Michigan. But again, generally speaking, we don't really have these large areas of really, really significant drought. There are some pockets that definitely could use a rain, especially for beans moving forward and for ecology. But in general, we're not seeing this kind of widespread, really dry soils that we see in bad drought years. Go to the next slide, Molly. So we have precipitation. Yes, we have lots of humidity. Yeah, the heat is there, but a lot of plants like heat. We have the humidity, and we have adequate soil moisture in most places. So what I'm showing you here is a plot of vegetation greenness from satellites, a metric that we call the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI. And what this plot shows is from the beginning of the growing season to the end of the growing season, our average NDVI from beginning to end across the whole Midwest. So every single state from Minnesota down to Kentucky. And the higher the NDVI, the higher your vegetation greenness. Generally speaking, the healthier that vegetation is. And what this is showing is that for the Midwest region as a whole is our red line for this year. This year, that red line is not only above average, but it's outside of that gray area, which is kind of the bounds of the last 25 years. So right now and through much of this growing season that we've seen since mid-July, the region, the Midwest region as a whole, is greener than it has been at this time any year going back to at least 2001. When we break it down by state, not surprising that we have the highest overall greenness on record in Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin and in Indiana and Ohio. So you don't have to go back to the last slide, Molly, but it showed some dryness over northern Indiana. Despite that, we still have record NDVI in Indiana. We're near highest in Illinois and Michigan, despite some dryness there. And we're not at record high, but above average in Missouri and Kentucky. So pretty much every single state in the region is above average or at record levels of greenness, indicating how healthy our vegetation is, generally speaking, across the region right now. Go to the next slide. So I talked about precipitation. We talked about soils and vegetation. We're going to end with hydrology. As you would expect, when we get a lot of precipitation, our streams are pretty full. This is showing stream flow as a percentile. Any dots you see that are blue to dark blue and green, those are areas where we're above average on our stream flow. And of course, it does make sense. We're, Iowa, Minnesota, parts of northern Wisconsin. And then anywhere you see kind of the yellows to reds, that's where you're below average on the stream flow. And it can be hard, especially a colorblind person like myself, to see the difference here. So the map on the right is just showing the streams where the gauges are showing below normal flow. And you can see, again, it's parts of Illinois, Michigan, a little bit of Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, where we've had a little bit below normal precipitation, but certainly nothing widespread that would, especially outside of Michigan, that would suggest any kind of regional drought problem. And it's amazing when you look at Iowa, only the border regions have any stream that has below normal flow, really indicating just how exceptionally wet and consistently wet it's been this growing season across Iowa. Go to the next slide. And this is shown up in the drought monitor. On the map on the left is the most recent U.S. drought monitor. It was released today, but it's current as of Tuesday, so it was August 5th. And it's showing that about 90% of our entire Midwest region is not in any kind of USDM category, what we consider D-nada, nothing at all. We see the pockets of abnormal dryness or moderate drought in those places that we've been kind of picking out: central western Michigan, northeast Illinois, east central Illinois. But those are very kind of isolated places that have just missed the heavier rains. And when we look at the 4-week change map, like how we've evolved with drought going back to the beginning of July, anywhere on the top left, you see green. Those are areas that have improved drought status. Yellow or browns have worsened their drought status. So even though we see some abnormal dryness and a little bit of moderate drought across parts of northern Illinois and northern Indiana, we've actually seen an improvement over the last 4 weeks where we've removed a lot of the worst drought situations. And so that's actually good news there, that in the heart of the growing season, that critical July period for crops, we've gotten an abundant amount of rain there in northern Illinois. On the flip side, in Michigan, we've seen a recent degradation there. And I'll talk about impacts here to kind of wrap things up. A lot of them coming out of Michigan because of the dryness over that period of time. Go to the next slide then, Molly. And I think this next one is my last one. The things that really matter, right? Not just numbers and maps, but impacts. On the ag and ecology side, one of the things we've heard more about is reduced blueberry size and a shorter overall U-pick blueberry season, which of course is very important for tourism and the economy in Western Michigan. That's been an issue there. Of course, those berries need water to fill, and just having the reduced blueberry size because of recent drought. Reports and photos of some corn stunting and a little bit of tip back where you don't see the full ear of the corn filled with kernels. That is an issue with heat and drought during reproduction stage. In Northeast Illinois and in parts of Michigan, again, that's pretty isolated. I don't want to give off the thought that that's something that's extremely widespread, but in those places that haven't gotten quite enough rain, we see a little bit of that. Also hearing about some nursery and potted trees that have showed a lot of stress in Michigan nurseries. And something that's not related to our current year, but last year, of course, Ohio went through a really significant drought, something that Aaron may talk about later on. And we're seeing the lagged effects of that as some yellow poplar decline in Southeast Southeast Ohio as a result of that. And then lastly, in hydrology and energy, we've had some reduced flow in the Kankakee River, especially from the headwaters in Indiana and then into Illinois. That's reduced cooling efficiency for some of our cooling power plants. And more and more reports with that worsening drought situation in Western Michigan, some well water issues out of Ottawa County. So overall, drought conditions across the region are region-wide are actually not bad at all. We do have these pockets, Michigan, some parts of Illinois, that are still dealing with some dryness, but overall as a region, not doing too bad. So turn it over to Crystal then to talk about what's coming up.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Trent, so much. Certainly, that is good news that as of right now, we have minimal drought. So, yeah, thank you so much. So, next, we will turn to Crystal for an overview of our drought outlook. Crystal?
All right, great. Thank you. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Molly. So we'll start out with our 7-day precipitation forecast and what can we expect over the course of the next week. And what you can see there as we zoom in on the Midwest is a view of a pretty big swath of precipitation that's in northern Missouri going through Iowa and through Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin. And that's anywhere from 1.5 inches to over 3 inches. And there's a slow moving frontal system that's going to be coming through. And we'll basically see that over the course of this weekend, Saturday through Monday. Now, when you look for other parts of the area, you can see that Minnesota has an area of some of those light greens to mid greens, which is less than 1/4 of an inch of rain. And you see it a lot across southern parts of the Midwest where there aren't really going to be any big precipitation producing systems that we're expecting over the next 7 days across the rest of those areas. They wind up being cut off from the Gulf. As you see, if you look down at Florida, there's a lot of rain down in that area across the southeastern U.S. as the Gulf just remains cut off from most of the Midwest during this time. Next slide, please. And then going forward in the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook, we'll start out with that as everybody across much of the Midwest has been dealing with a lot of heat, and that's slated to continue for the 8 to 14 days going through August 20th. We're looking at warmer than normal temperatures across the Midwest, and this is pretty high confidence. You can see as we get into those darker oranges, I don't know if that's an orangey red, what that is to the far right over the eastern U.S., but those percentages are pretty high. So we've got high confidence this is going to continue. So initially, we've got some ridging over the eastern U.S. as we're starting in August 13th, 14th, and that transitions to a more progressive, flatter pattern across the country. And as we get into that, we'll look at the precip here in a second. But by the time we get to the middle or end of week 2, some of that ridging comes building back in over the central U.S., and that ridging tends to bring those higher temperatures with it. Next slide, please. The precipitation outlook, we're leaning towards above normal precip over most of the Midwest, but again, it's not a particularly strong signal. As I indicated, as we go from that ridging to more of a progressive pattern, you've got some smaller systems that will be tracking across the country, but where exactly those are going to set up and who winds up being a winner in the precipitation is still to be determined. So basically just a broad swath of probably above normal precipitation amounts, but again, lower confidence on that. Next slide, please. And then as we get into the 8 to 14 day hazards outlook, what you can see here is for the larger hazard map, that's kind of inset, actually the tiny one I've got in the upper left, there's not a really strong signal for hazards in those 8 to 14 days, but what we did see show up in the Midwest area across the Southwest and Missouri is this potential for some extreme heat in that 20 to 40% chance, so a slight risk showing up in that somewhere between the 15th and the 20th, probably a little hedging more as you get further east towards that 18th to 20th period, and that would be if we get that upper ridge building back in over that area. Next slide, please. As we go into the 3 to 4 week temperature outlook, what you can see here going from the 16th, so there's some overlap in this because this was last updated on August 1st, but from the 16th to the 29th, looks like we could set up a ridge trough ridge pattern over the US, and that's why you're seeing this equal chances over the central portion of the country. There's a lower confidence in that signal over the Midwest due to differences in the details of exactly where is that upper trough going to set up and how deep is that going to get into the central US, and whether it'll be more of a transient feature or if it's really going to set up shop there. So there's better confidence then in the above normal temperatures over Ohio and eastern Kentucky, but kind of an equal chances, anybody's guess as we get over the central US. Next slide, please. And then the signal for precipitation in the 3 to 4 week outlook shows a stronger signal for above normal precipitation across the southeastern US, where again, they've got access to more of that Gulf moisture, but in equal chances across pretty much the rest of the country. That Gulf moisture could sneak up into Kentucky, and so they could be winners in terms of precipitation during that time period, but as you get further north and west, it looks a little less active and just again cut off from that more abundant moisture feed. Next slide, please. As we get into the seasonal temperature outlook, we're looking at August, September, October, that 3-month period. Again, a lead towards above normal temperatures overall across the Midwest. Mid-range confidence for most of the area with a little bit lower confidence as you get over northern Minnesota and then that Missouri, western Illinois, western Kentucky. Next slide. Then when we get in the seasonal precipitation outlook, there's a lower confidence in these patterns over the Midwest for this time period, kind of an equal chances over a lot of the Midwest. That higher confidence in below normal precipitation below normal precipitation over the Intermountain West as we get potential for more of that ridging to set up there, and then above normal precipitation over the southeastern US with that Gulf fetch of moisture being more confined to that area, and it looks like that's going to be sort of the way the pattern looks like it sets up right now as far as the season is concerned. But in the Midwest, we kind of wind up sort of straddling in between, maybe some ridging and maybe some troughing to the southeast, ridging up to the west, and sort of in the sandwich period where we could get into, some lucky people might get into a more active period if you like precipitation, but otherwise, and maybe some potential for that below normal signal to be a little stronger, to expand from where it is over the Intermountain West, but we'll see as we get going. Next slide, please. So overall, the seasonal drought outlook from August through October is showing improvement over the current drought conditions, that spotty drought conditions that we had over the Great Lakes right now that we currently have. Really only shows persistence of the drought across the northwest Minnesota area. I will say when I looked at the monthly outlook for August, it does show it persisting, the drought over the Great Lakes and especially the Michigan area persisting through this month. So improvement over Michigan really isn't anticipated until we get more into maybe mid-September to October. This is only mid-range confidence, I think, especially across the west where we see potential for maybe that dry signal to eke in a little bit more and some of this upper ridging that I talked about to hold sway. So there is maybe some potential for things to be a little drier and a little hotter over western portions of the Midwest. So as far as the summary is concerned, we're looking at overall good confidence above normal temperatures for the Midwest for the period of August through October. Lower confidence in the precip signal during that time, lean towards drier than normal over Minnesota, Iowa, western Wisconsin, and towards wetter than normal as you get into Kentucky and eastern Ohio. And mid-range confidence in overall drought improvement over the next 3 months around the Great Lakes with continued drought over northern Minnesota. And that is it for me. I can pass it back to Molly.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Crystal, for that great quick overview of what may be to come for the region. So our final presenter for today is Erin Wilson. Erin is the state climatologist of Ohio. And on each of these webinars, we will be highlighting a DEWS partner in the region just to share different drought information or experiences or resources. And I thought that Erin's story about the 2024 drought and drought early warning in Ohio would be a great one to kick us off. So I will turn it over to you, Erin, to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Molly. It's great to be here with all of you today. I thought maybe I was done talking about drought of 2024. Certainly, whenever you have these type of events, obviously they have a pretty big usage out of them, certainly from a learning and teaching perspective. But I think we'll cap it off here today for sure. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to look back a little bit. Certainly conditions, as Trent mentioned, Ohio sitting with its highest level of NDVI here on August 1st. This was not the case just a year ago, and we can start advancing, Molly, with the slides. Certainly, I had a big team of extension folks helping me, and as I'll mention later, I think last year it was really extension helped be the eyes and ears of our drought across the state, and many of us throughout our states recognize that. This was last July. We already had some severe streams and rivers really impacted livestock, pastures. These were particularly hard hit because Southeast Ohio, where is much more livestock than row crops. But it also provided opportunities to form really new partnerships and collaborations with some other state agencies, soil and water conservation districts in our counties, and some of that work is ongoing. These are scenes that you would expect at the end of September into October in Ohio, but this was the third week of August here with soybeans, so certainly not very green in the photos here like we're seeing right now. And of course, a lot of impacts, including fire and a lot of other things that we dealt with there. So, certainly we're looking back in time here. And one of the things that I like to do is start with this graph looking at the Palmer Drought Severity Index. So as we, most of us know, this is good for sort of long-term drought look. And for a long time, this was our primary tool for drought monitoring or looking at conditions and changes and determining where we have drought. And so on the graph here, you can see the brownish color showing low PDSI values and the green indicating those higher or wetter periods as well. And when we look at this, and many states sort of share this in common, you certainly see these prolonged clusters of drought period in the 1930s, 50s, 60s. You can even argue in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And since the 1970s or mid 60s there, we've seen a relatively uptick, right, in those green values, those green numbers, indicating wetter conditions across the region, and 4 of the peaks in this record occurring in Ohio since 1990. So, so both sort of the character of drought, perhaps in terms of, a lot of us talk about flashiness or flash drought conditions or rapid onset and rapid decrease. These are the types of things that we talk about these days. And certainly you can look at this map and see that droughts, can look a little bit different or have looked a little bit different over the more recent period. Last year, we hit a bottom value of minus 3.57. So even this is not our lowest since 1980, that coming in 1992 at minus 4.51. But certainly dry conditions last year, and something that we hadn't seen coming off very wet years of 17, 18, and 19. But this overall downward trend since that peak, and that sort of highlights something that we were picking up on region-wide that I think became critical to how we acted here in Ohio because of these conditions. We can go ahead and advance, Molly. So really quick, states across the region have different drought team makeups and how they kind of proceed. Ours is coordinated through the State Climate Office, and my position here is the State Climatologist of Ohio. We do have strong collaboration with all of our National Weather Service that cover Ohio, our NOAA Eastern Regional Headquarters. Our primary state agencies involved are the Emergency Management, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Natural Resources. And what I think we also have across much of the Midwest is really strong collaboration among our states. Again, because this desire to be strongly regionally coordinated, and so there's a lot of individual offices that are communicating, and even different groups running cross-state meetings like Indiana does each week as well. And we also have university partners, researchers, and again, this is probably a similar flavor to a lot of other agencies and drought operation teams around the Midwest, but certainly this is how we do it. We tend to primarily function through email. Others do more phone calls and things like that, but for us, we try to finalize things up for the U.S. Drought Monitor each week by Tuesday, mid-morning, late morning, get those into the national author, of course. Next slide. So, of course, most of us know what DEWS is. Ohio is geographically in the Midwest, DEWS there. And one of the things that I think, one of the lessons, and one of the hopefully a good message here is that, I think people matter. And one thing that DEWS does is bring together these existing networks of federal, tribal, state, local, and academic partners. It's not just data and information, but it's people and effective communication and willingness to talk about conditions and changing conditions across the landscape. And for me, that was really the powerful value of DEWS in this case, but also other strong partners in the region, USDA Midwest Climate Hub and NOAA Climate and things like that. This is really the bread and butter of the Midwest, and DEWS was a great example of this, of having this really effective communication, connection among the partners throughout the region, and something that I really utilized as a state climatologist here in the state. Next slide. So last April, Molly and Midwest DEWS organized, I think, a couple of meetings at least, to meet in April and to discuss drought potential in the Midwest. Again, some of the regional observations out of that meeting, thinking about the departures from temperature normal from the previous winter, some soil moisture loss. I could speak particularly here in Ohio. We've had a series of very dry falls as well, which sort of bucks some of the longer term trends that we've seen. But certainly coming off 2023, some dry soils. We had been in a decline, really a running average decline since 2018 of annual precipitation in the state. And so, a lot of places, Ohio included, not really fully recovered from these dry conditions. And so the idea was, okay, well, what happens now, right? If we're stressed now in April, what happens as we move into the upcoming summer? And sort of this idea that we need to be really closely monitoring drought conditions in the Midwest. And so taking that information then, I immediately contacted our Extension Ag Natural Resources leadership, made them aware, including the college dean, and making her aware that we're going to keep these things up to date to become really a key facet of our spring communications. Ohio State University Extension has a rapid response team, and part of that is drought. We also responded to the heavy rainfalls and prevent planting and things like that in 2019 as well. But we've got some communication mechanisms like the team calls and the newsletter that we were able to alert our stakeholders, that readership is over 6,000 stakeholders in the state, of the types of conditions that we're going to monitor, right? It's wet in early part of April, but we've got some long-term deficits that we need to be mindful as we move throughout the season. Next slide. So June 11th, this was the U.S. Drought Monitor, no categories, D-NADA, as Trent mentioned, across the state, but we had already enacted our rapid response drought team. And those are the members that you saw on the title slide. Key specialists and extension educators to get together to think about, okay, we're going to mobilize a response, making sure our producers have the best information on how to deal with conditions in the short term, but ultimately also gathering long-term conditions, long-term resilience strategies from a drought perspective. We knew we were already getting dry on July 11th, but there were no categories. So we can step through the next couple of slides here. A couple weeks later, we've got D1 introduced, portions of Southwest Ohio, Northeast, far Southeast. A couple weeks later, we now have D2 in the state, or severe drought. Central Ohio there and also in the Southeast. And then, of course, we've got this tropical storm Debbie that come up the eastern coast. We had very intense rainfall, 6 to 8 inches across the D1 drought area of Northeast Ohio. And that combination is not great. It wasn't the last time we saw that drought to very intense rainfall combination. And we see that across our landscape. And that can create different issues, obviously, with flooding and things like that. Next slide. On August 13th, we had D3 introduced to Meigs County there in southeastern Ohio. This was the first time Ohio had D3 in the state since August 28th of 2012. So you had to go back sometime in the U.S. Drought Monitor era to get D3 introduced into the state. And then click one more time. Just a couple weeks after that, then D4 was introduced into portions of the state. And with the U.S. Drought Monitor inception in around 2000, this is the first time Ohio had experienced D4 identified on the map. And I think it's important to say that because over time, our drought monitoring capabilities, I would like to think, has improved. Certainly a lot more collaboration within the state, but certainly, for this part of the country, this part of our state, this was very intense already, and it was about to get worse. So next slide. This is where we maxed out here on September 24th. So I know it says current. I didn't update that. Sorry, but just this was snapshot from presentations then. We had about 13% of the state covered in D4, and the most D2 to D4, so severe, extreme, and exceptional drought categories there across the state. But it had expanded and included much of the state. Not a record in terms of coverage, but certainly in intensity. This also kicked off our Emergency Management Agency and Department of Agriculture Drought Working Group. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second because something fairly interesting happened just as our drought got started last year. But we'll come back to that in a second. Next slide. So extension is the eyes and ears of drought. I'm just giving you a glimpse of what we've seen, what we saw last year. And again, I'll probably go through these fairly quickly, but our pasture conditions by September had fallen to 93% of poor to very poor. We don't see these types of conditions in Ohio very often. And so a lot of producers, again, pasture and livestock was really hard hit. Winter stocks fed early, early weaning and selling of cows, and hauling operations became a real chore. 60,000 gallons more of water. State lakes being opened up and tapped for agricultural use in this portion of the state. And again, our drought sort of stayed south and east of some of the major metropolitan areas. Certainly Columbus was impacted, Dayton was impacted for a shorter period of time, but the water impacts in southeastern Ohio were tremendous last year as well. Next slide. Thinking about, row crops, harvest activities were 2 to 3 weeks early because of the really dry conditions, high variable, a lot of yield reports, highly variable where we did have some spotty showers. And that fall harvest risk was very significant throughout much of Ohio there, even outside of the worst of the drought conditions. Next slide. Specialty crops, really interesting to think about drought impacts, both positive and negative, in areas where agritourism is really impacted in southeastern Ohio, pumpkin farm operations and attractions, agritourism areas, particularly hard hit in some of those areas. But with dry conditions, relatively ease on the insect pressure. And I was at the Ohio Grape and Wine Conference, and that's a great conference to go to back in the winter. And there were a lot of folks talking about really sweet varieties and grapes and stuff this year because of those dry conditions last year. But certainly there were pretty hard hit impacts as well. Loss of Christmas tree seedlings across the south and southeast, and that's a long-term investment that will have impacts to those producers, 5, 6, 7 years down the road as well. Next slide. The hydrology of things, creeks, private wells, springs not running, historically low flows on the Hocking River. This was challenging records here back to 1930. So, working with our USGS partners in the state, just looking at these tremendously significant low flows in some of our areas. Not a lot of drawdown activities as we went later into the fall, into the winter conditions on some of our major reservoirs and inflows, because they were already non-existent, right? And so drawdown to winter pool had naturally occurred without some of those water releases as well. We had a few community volunteer water restrictions, but these were pretty isolated, but where they were occurring, they were pretty severe as well. Next slide. We talk about greenness. This was, Jim Knoll at the Ohio River Forecast Center in Wilmington, Ohio, provided this snapshot, which was really cool that, he picked this out looking at the true color images, September 15th, 2023 versus the same date in 2024. So talk about the lack of green here as we were in mid-September with those advanced crop dry down conditions. Our trees were turning very rapidly. Probably the worst time in Ohio to create a burn ban, open burn ban, not just in the months of October and November, but during that prime camping season in September as well. That was not very popular, but of course it was very necessary with all that tinder out there and pretty long burning fuels across the landscape as well. Next slide. And then finally, thinking about landscapes and horticulture, this was my lawn, dead grass, which came back really nice this year with a 22 species mix, including Confederate violets and a lot of clover and things that took over, and I'm okay with that. But certainly sports complexes struggled. So just a really broad impact from the drought conditions in 2024. And Trent mentioned our yellow poplar. Combination with scale and wetness diseases this year is really presenting some serious, deterioration in that species across southeastern Ohio as well. Next slide. So kind of a summary, the weeks spent in D3, D4, which are critical for a lot of Farm Science and Service Agency programs and USDA programs. We have many counties that spent more than 15 weeks in at least D3 or D4 across southeastern Ohio. Big impacts on hay production area, about 45% of the state's hay producing area, 25% of soybean, 27% of corn. So major ag impacts certainly from this as well. And then on top of that, not only is it bad enough that it's really dry, but we had some more extreme weather to deal with. So let's move to the next slide. Of course, we had this monster come ashore, right? This is Helene that came ashore in the Big Bend region of Florida, certainly dropping a lot of rainfall and catastrophic flooding across parts of the Carolinas, Tennessee, but it really moved up into the lower Ohio Valley and stalled out there. And so you can see where we had D3, D4 drought, we had some areas picking up 6 to 10 inches of rain on that type of soil surface. So we had very rapid flash flooding in portions of south central Ohio. At this point, we had a big media response like, well, is the drought over, right? So a lot of educational opportunities to talk about that a single event like this, especially heavy rain on drought ground, isn't necessarily going to fix things overnight, right? And so there's a long tail of these things. And ultimately, we carried drought conditions in Ohio through April of 2025, right? And so it takes a long time for that recovery to take place, as many of you know, at least over a large distance, and certainly that did happen here for us. But it did have some improving impacts along with some negative impacts as well. And you can see the next couple of slides. We can do these pretty quick. One of the big impacts with the wind, combination of weak corn stalks and wind, we had a lot of laying down of those corn stalks, which really slowed harvest. Just a back-to-back sort of double whammy for a lot of the ag folks. And we had mold in our soybean fields. These are beans that were sprouting in the fields, and we had a new cover crop of soybeans that popped up and filled fields full of fall emerged soybeans that, of course, didn't make it past the first frost. But this is just the sign of both the drought loss of soybeans to the field, and then very wet conditions coming on the tail end of that and sprouting those conditions across the field as well. All right, so next slide. So, part of the message today is not just to give you a glimpse of what was happening in Ohio, but to summarize our extension mobilization and really what I think the drought early warning system and this great network allowed us to do. So having that early warning, we organize specialists in, of course, weather, agronomy, forages, livestock, specialty crops, our forests, soils, farm management, marketing, and communications in our college. And we're having those meetings in early June already to talk about how we can do that. So we had weekly meetings, gathered a lot of online resources and information. Between June and December, we had 4,100 views of our social media, about a little bit more than 2,600 of our active viewers, with really strong engagement. 6.5% engagement, I'm told, is really strong. We conducted 2 in-service for extension, one focused on ag and the other focused on horticultural and natural resource educators. There if you're familiar with extension, there tends to be a strong overturn. And many folks had not experienced or been in those roles in extension with drought conditions. And so it was an opportunity to really help elevate our capacity to help stakeholders in the state with these conditions. Next slide. I mentioned work with soil and water conservation districts, which continues. There was an initial survey of over 170 cattle producers in 14 counties in Southeast Ohio that allowed us to analyze the impact of drought on the economy. Some of that work was presented last month at the National Association of County Ag Agents meeting in Billings, Montana. We worked with the Department of Agriculture to exchange information. So, we do have a drought annex in Ohio. I should say we did have a drought annex in Ohio that I thought was still in play and process. We've done a lot of work with emergency management over the last several years. But because there were some procedural changes that were taking place, that drought annex was removed from the state emergencies management plan. They're shifting toward a different way of operating. So when I contact to say, typically our drought task force enacts, when we're seeing D2 conditions or severe conditions in the state, that mechanism wasn't there. But Ohio Emergency Management was working really closely with the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And so ODA really picked up the mantle in terms of making sure that a lot of that agricultural impacts and agricultural operations moved forward from a drought perspective. And it also allowed us to sort of remind us that, we need to review these procedures moving forward. But ultimately, because of the initial impacts being in agriculture, ODA really spearheaded the event, and it gave us an opportunity also to, we work a lot with, obviously, Department of Agriculture, but it gave us even more opportunity to go around the state together as a partnership, talking about not just the conditions and updating stakeholders, but then how they can contact ODA, a lot of the credit and relief program. They worked really hard. We had state legislators working hard to get additional, not just credit relief, but actual payment relief for a lot of our livestock producers as well. And so it became a really great synthesis of partnership here in the state, despite those drought conditions and very hard conditions that we had. It gave us plenty of opportunities to talk about our citizen science opportunities to engage in, things like the Condition Monitoring Observer Report. So, citizens and others providing these reports to let us see those conditions in real time through their eyes as well. And so from an extension perspective, being able to educate and provide opportunities for the public to engage in our drought monitoring efforts. Next slide. So kind of the takeaways and resources, the DEWS has a write-up that was conducted in March of this past year, and really I think nicely captured my thoughts that people in the network, when it's communicated effectively, I think is really the bread and butter of DEWS. This was certainly one of Ohio's most impactful droughts, but I hope that it shows that drought early warning systems work. They work when we have effective communication and partnership and buy-in. And again, part of that is going back, thinking about lack of drought, rusty procedures, revisiting those drought procedures with collaborators, but also really stressing that there's a lot of ways to get involved in drought monitoring. So my message to our extension across the entire country, for those that don't, reach out and work with your state climatologists and drought teams. I think there's opportunities there. And just like that, to our drought teams, there are opportunities to connect with our state extension educators throughout the various states as well as a partnership, right? Drought monitoring takes a lot of eyes, ears, and partnerships across our states, and I think there's plenty of opportunity there to further, enhance this great network of folks we have working in the Midwest. So with that, I'll go ahead and conclude today with a final image at our Eastern Research Ag facility in Caldwell, Ohio, sort of the heart of our drought conditions last year, and turn it back over to Molly. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron, for that great presentation. And another thank you to all of our presenters for taking their time and effort today to prepare those presentations for us. So we will now move on to a short Q&A session with our speakers. So a reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the questions box if you haven't already. As of right now, we actually don't have any questions, but we did have one comment just going back to Trent's presentation from our partner in Kentucky, confirmed that Aberdeen, Kentucky probably averages around 50 to 52 inches of precipitation in a year, and that area reached its normal rainfall for the year by the end of June this year. So definitely a significant precipitation events that we're seeing in that area. So I will wait just another minute here as we see if we have any other questions that come in, but I will start to kind of recap some things. So mark your calendar for the next webinar, which will take place on Thursday, October 2nd at 2 p.m. Central again. So these webinars will take place every other month on the first Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. The link to register for this next webinar on October 2nd will be in the chat box. And speakers for that webinar will be announced here shortly in a couple of weeks. But for every webinar, we will have someone like Trent recapping drought conditions and impacts. We'll have someone like Crystal presenting about the drought outlooks, and then we'll have a special DEWS partner presentation like Aaron gave us today. So without other questions coming in, I think I will go ahead and wrap up. As you exit the webinar today, please take a minute, if you can, to complete a short survey just to give us some feedback on the webinar to make sure that we are providing information and creating value and something that's helpful for you. Another big thank you to Trent, Crystal, and Aaron for their presentations. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining us.